Week 10 is in the books, and we had some crazy game this past week. CJ Stroud is him. The Browns come back on the Ravens. Josh Dobbs is cooking no matter the team he is on. But as always, I'm bringing you my top waiver wire picks going into week 11 of the fantasy football season. So stay tuned with a lot of information that's going to be given with first 4 teams on a bye week: the Falcons, the Colts, the Patriots, and the Saints. So make sure you do plan accordingly. Bijan, Drake London, Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave. The list goes on with these teams. Once again, plan accordingly as you go into week 11 of the fantasy football season. Let's get straight into my waiver wire priorities. Before we get into my priorities here, I do have some players, 4 players to be exact, that should already be rostered that I did want to talk about and mention coming into this week here. And number 1, that is Kyler Murray. I mean, we saw him come back, 11 months off that ACL tear, playing the Atlanta Falcons. He's coming back and looking like himself. He made some tough throws, and this is exactly what we saw. Over 18 fantasy points he scored in his first game, and is going to get better and better as the season progresses. So that's really exciting. He should already be rostered if you are in sharper leagues. If not, I would be picking him up maybe in one quarterback. If somehow he's available in Superflex, that would be crazy. Devin Singletary, another one that we kept saying, man, when is Devin Singletary going to get this opportunity? What's going to happen? I'm pretty sure he had a career touches of 32 touches in a total game this past week against the Cincinnati Bengals. 30 touches on the ground, over 150 yards on the ground as well. 1 touchdown, 23 fantasy points he came into this week. It was absolutely crazy, and that's exactly what we wanted to see from Devin Singletary. We were waiting for it. We just didn't know when it was going to happen. Waiting for it for the past 3 games, 4 or 5 weeks, it felt like. And he finally brought it here against the Cincinnati Bengals. Not saying you should start him next week, just saying he should already be rostered. Let's see what he does as the season continues. The next is Romeo Doubs here. One of the most favorite, Jordan Love's favorite target in the red zone area. Scored another touchdown this week, caught 3 out of 5 with a touchdown, over 12 fantasy points. He is somebody that I like to keep in the stash. If you are dealing with injuries, he can be a good plug and play with the hopes that he does find the end zone. And last but not least is Michael Mayer. He is somebody that is continuing getting the opportunity here, somebody that is growing in his role as well. The Raiders obviously just won caught 3 out of 5 targets and a touchdown, over 10 fantasy points. This team is getting better and better with Antonio Pierce as the new interim head coach, and Michael Mayer is going to continue to get work as the season progresses. So 4 plays that should already be rostered coming into this year, or coming into this week, excuse me. And as I wrap that up, let's go straight into my waiver wire priorities here. My first waiver wire priorities, that is Keaton Mitchell, and he is somebody that I'm kind of deeming to be somewhat of a Devon A-Chain type of role player, because with the limited amount of touches that he has been seeing these past 2 weeks, he has been getting these high upside plays, high upside points. Now, he hasn't been getting nowhere near Devon, where it was like, 30 plus points, but he is getting, he is getting some decent points, right? Week 9 against Seattle, caught 9 touches, 138 yards on the ground, and a touchdown. This past week against Cleveland, breaks out for another one, 3 touches, 34 yards, and a touchdown, over 13 fantasy points. He is somebody that should be rostered on your team, just in case. Once again, like I said, Alvin Kamara, Ramondre Stevenson, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor are on a bye week this week, and he is somebody that you can potentially plug and play with the hopes of a high upside play going into week 11. He is currently rostered in 23% of ESPN leagues and rostered in 49% of sleeper leagues, meaning he is available in over 50% of both ESPN and sleeper leagues, which means he should be available for you to pick up and hopefully snag on your team to have these high upside plays. So keep that in mind. He's going to continue to get the work. He's not winning in the snap percentages on the ground above Gus, above Justice Hill. He is somebody that is coming in for these explosive plays, and somebody that is making the most out of his opportunities. And as that continues to happen, you can definitely see that increase with his opportunities, maybe week in and week out. Somebody that you could potentially trust to start as the season progresses, maybe even in the fantasy playoffs. So Keaton Mitchell is my first waiver wire priority. My second waiver wire priority coming into this week at the tight end position. I kind of mentioned his quarterback, a little bit earlier, and that is Trey McBride. And look, this is exactly what we were talking about. Zach and I was like, yo, you got to pick up Trey McBride, because there are so many opportunities, so many things that he can do when Kyler Murray is back. A Pro Bowler type of quarterback caliber play, somebody that has produced fantasy relevant players all around the quarterback or the tight end, the wide receiver, and the running back position. Kyler Murray has produced significant fantasy players each and every week, and Trey McBride was that guy this week. It's one of the biggest things that I kept saying on our live stream, saying, hey, I understand Hollywood Brown is a good start this week, but I think we were overlooking that A.J. Terrell matchup here. And we saw that with Hollywood Brown only caught 1 out of 4 targets this past week, scored 3 fantasy points. But the person that did eat was Trey McBride, caught 8 out of 9 targets, over 131 yards in the air, over 21 fantasy points. And that's exactly what you wanted coming into this week. He was third in snaps behind Hollywood Brown and Michael Wilson. Trey McBride ran the 3rd most routes on this team. And that's exactly what you want to see. And that's going to continue to grow and continue to progress as he's finally getting this chemistry with Kyler Murray, his quarterback. And this team is better now that Kyler Murray is here. So Trey McBride, somebody that is rostered in over 50% of ESPN leagues and rostered in rostered in 62% of sleeper leagues. So definitely something that you should be considering. Trey McBride is my second waiver wire priority. All right, going into my next waiver wire priority here. Before I actually jump into that, I do want to make this clear. My next 3 to 10 are players that I'm ranking based off high upside of situations and things that are going to change, because you may see somebody further along this list and you say, hey, well, he had a really good week. He had over double-digit fantasy points, but not this person. It's because I'm ranking it based off of their situation, how I believe they're going to be progressing week in and week out versus some other players. And you will understand that when I get to my number 3 and number 4. And my number 3 waiver wire priority coming into this week is Michael Wilson. Okay, hear me out. Michael Wilson, somebody who saw the 2nd most snaps on this team behind Hollywood Brown with 58 snaps coming into week 10. Now that Kyler Murray is back, you can see how Kyler Murray can spread the ball around and can feed the opportunities to these other wide receivers. Obviously, you have Hollywood Brown, but the 2nd wide receiver on this team is technically Michael Wilson, right? And he's also getting acclimated with Kyler Murray. He is also trying to learn and understand the timing with Kyler Murray. And as the weeks goes on, he is somebody I believe that's going to be able to flex. You're going to be able to flex going into the weeks, maybe potentially into the playoffs. This is why I am prioritizing him now rather than later over some of these other players that, once again, you're going to be hearing on this list. And Michael Wilson didn't have the best game. He caught 3 out of 6 targets, 34 yards, had just over 6 fantasy points coming into this week. But we've seen his ceiling. We've seen what he can do when he does get the targets. In week 4, obviously with a different quarterback in Josh Dobbs versus the San Francisco 49ers, caught 7 out of 7, 2 touchdowns, over 70 yards, and over 26 fantasy points. That is a ceiling with Josh Dobbs. What happens if that is a ceiling with Kyler Murray? And I think that can be even higher. And this is where I'm projecting, because once you get acclimated with Kyler Murray for a couple weeks, he can understand how Michael Wilson plays. What are the type of weapons? What is his timing? Is he running more down the field? Is he more of a middle of the field guy? Whatever the case may be. And if Hollywood can't be available, like we saw this past week with A.J. Terrell, not only do you have Trey McBride, but you also have Michael Wilson. So he's my 3rd waiver wire priority going into week 11. Okay, going into my 4th waiver wire priority coming into week 11, that is Noah Brown. Yes, I understand why isn't he higher, but hear me out. Before I actually get into that, he is balled out. Look, the past 2 weeks, 27 fantasy points a week night against Tampa Bay, caught 6 out of 6, 153 yards and a touchdown. Now against Cincinnati this past week, caught 8 out of 7, over 172 yards, over 24 fantasy points. He went crazy. And I'm not saying he is not a big part of this offense, because he is. But one of the biggest caveats specifically for this game is that Nico Collins was out. Now you're saying, yes, I understand Nico Collins and Tank Dell did play in week 9 against Tampa Bay, but that was a shootout. That was back and forth dueling with CJ Stroud, with Baker Mayfield. And I'm not necessarily sure that is going to be a consistent thing week in and week out. Now, I do believe in CJ Stroud. I do believe he is in the conversation of being one of the rookie offensive players of the year, and arguably potentially MVP, which is absolutely crazy. And I'm not discrediting Noah Brown. I'm just saying I'm not necessarily sure if this is going to be something that's going to be consistent week in and week out. Now, I may be wrong, and you may want to prioritize Noah Brown, but what I do understand is that there's two people ahead of him. That is Nico Collins, and that is Tank Dell. Now, once again, Nico Collins was out this game, but the only game we have seen with all three of these guys produce was when it was a massive shootout against Tampa Bay, once again in week 9, and every single person on that team had a phenomenal fantasy day in week 9. Noah Brown, Dalton Schultz, Nico Collins, and Tank Dell, all four. That is not something that's going to be consistent, right? So this is why I'm prioritizing him as my number 4 and not maybe my top 3. But once again, he is somebody that has produced and has done really well in the past 2 weeks. Now let's see if it can be consistent. Noah Brown has been blowing my mind, to be completely honest. 7 out of 8 targets, once again, over 172 yards in the air against Cincinnati. But we all kind of expected that to be a shootout. Let's see what it is going to be with the Arizona Cardinals. Maybe their defense plays a little better and can maintain Kyler Murray. If not, this might be another shootout. But I do expect Nico Collins to be back in week 11. So Noah Brown is my 4th waiver wire priority coming into this week. All right, going into my 5th waiver wire priority here, and that is Zach Charbonnet at the running back position here. And someone that is kind of making you worry about what's going to happen with Kenneth Walker. But at the same time, Kenneth Walker did have a good game, which is also very confusing. Okay, so let's start off with Zach Charbonnet. This past week, he had over 10 fantasy points, 6 carries on the ground for 44 yards, and caught 4 out of 5 passes in the air. Now, when you look at Kenneth Walker and what he did, he had 19 carries, 63 yards on the ground, and he only had 1 catch in the air, but he did have 19 fantasy points, and that 1 catch that he did have, he took it for 63 yards and a touchdown. So what's interesting here is that Zach Charbonnet actually outsnapped Kenneth Walker versus the Washington Commanders. 42% of the snaps, or 42 snaps out of 80 versus Kenneth Walker 38 out of 80. So it was essentially a 50-50 type of backfield and workload coming into this week. But Kenneth Walker did excel in the fantasy points with that touchdown. Now that did save him, and I think if he were to take that touchdown away, their fantasy outings would have looked very similar. But what's crazy is that Kenneth Walker looked explosive still. So did Zach Charbonnet. So another game that you can't really tell, because this game, Washington really wanted to show up and play, and the Seattle Seahawks were struggling at times to move the ball and get the ball down the field, which kind of resulted to them leaning on Zach Charbonnet early. And then you saw that burst in energy with Kenneth Walker, and then they kind of all changed again. So look, Zach Charbonnet is still somebody I'm prioritizing, having on my team. One of the biggest things Zach always says is that if Kenneth Walker does go down and misses 1 or 2 games, Zach Charbonnet is a top 15 running back at any given week. So he is somebody that is prioritizing, especially as he is gaining more and more workload week in and week out. Okay, my 6th waiver wire priority, still at the running back position, going to the Minnesota Vikings. That is Ty Chandler. Now, this one is not sexy. Based off what you need coming into this week, like I kind of mentioned earlier, Alvin Kamara, Bijan Robinson, Jonathan Taylor, Ramondre Stevenson. If you need a running back, Ty Chandler could be somebody that can be getting opportunities coming into this week. Why? Is because we saw Alexander Madison go down with a concussion. What we've seen with concussions, normally sometimes they do come back in the same week, right? Or no, it's only 1 week. Essentially, throughout the practice, Alexander Madison probably won't practice. He's probably going through all these hurdles saying, hey, if he can get into maybe Friday and does practice, then Ty Chandler is probably not going to be a huge priority. But if that doesn't trend in that way, it's probably best for you to pick him up and say, you can actually potentially have somebody to start going into week 11. Let me tell you why. 15 carries, 45 yards, and a touchdown, had over 10 fantasy points. And guess who he plays going into week 11? He plays the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos currently give up the most amount of fantasy points to the running back position. And this is exactly what we've been saying all along, and probably for the past 3 to 4, 5, 6 weeks with the Denver Broncos. And the way Josh Dobbs is playing and the way they're moving the ball, they have opportunities to score, specifically for Ty Chandler to find the end zone, like we saw against the New Orleans Saints. So that is something that I'm going to be prioritized. If you do need a running back, Ty Chandler is somebody you can pick up and plug and play if Alexander Madison is going to miss week 11. All right, my 7th waiver wire priority, somebody that you guys know I love. And he finally did find the end zone for the first time in his career, had his second highest fantasy outing this year so far, and that is Quentin Johnston. Caught 4 out of 4 and a touchdown for over 13 fantasy points, but we do have to understand this was a massive shootout here against the Detroit Lions. And do I expect this to happen again? Probably not, but hear me out. One of the biggest things here is Keenan Allen. I know he was in and out of the game. Maybe it's his adrenaline that was pushing him through, but what happens if he is not 100% going into next week against the Green Bay Packers? This is something that I'm going to be keeping an eye out on, because Quentin Johnston, if Keenan Allen is not 100% going into week 11, Quentin Johnston could see even more of an uptick in production without Keenan Allen. I mean, we saw his second. He actually led this team in snaps and was tied with route runs with Keenan Allen here. He did have the third targets, so it was Keenan Allen, Jalen Guy, and Quentin Johnston. There was a couple opportunities where Quentin could have caught the ball. I would say, I agree, he could have caught the ball, but they were all pass interference, and that were called out. So those targets technically didn't count towards Quentin. So he did call 4 out of 4 and a touchdown, once again, for over 13 fantasy points. But once again, if Keenan Allen does not play, which I'm not saying he's not, I'm just saying if he doesn't trend in the right direction going into this week versus Green Bay, then this is where we could potentially see Quentin Johnston fully unleashed. So he is somebody that's still available in a lot of leagues here, somebody that you guys should keep an eye out on. Rostered in 33% of ESPN League and rostered in 44% of Sleeper Leagues. If you do need a flex potentially going into week 11, he could be a good plug and play. Okay, my 8th waiver wire priority, somebody that I've been raving about all offseason, and he has been an absolute dud until, honestly, week 8, and then he had a dud game in week 9. That is Brandon Cooks, because he just went off against my Giants, which is typical. Caught 9 out of 10 targets, over 170 yards and a touchdown, 32 fantasy points. If I'm not mistaken, he did finish as a top 3 wide receiver coming into this week. Excuse me, top 4 wide receiver coming into this week, which is absolutely absurd. So definitely keep that in mind. Brandon Cooks here. This is why I'm treading lightly, because against Philly, who a secondary that does give up a lot of points to the wide receiver position, he only caught 1 pass. And now you go against the Giants, where you were essentially winning. You're not running the ball, you're throwing the ball. Is this going to happen again? Right, like they're playing the Carolina Panthers next week. Do they just pepper Brandon Cooks the way they did the New York Giants, or do they just run all over the Carolina Panthers? I'm not sure. This is why he is in my number 8th waiver wire priority, but he is on one of the highest pass catching offenses coming into this year, and this is why they're going to be even tougher matchup. He has Washington, Seattle, Philly again, Buffalo, Miami, Detroit. He has to break out in one of these games, and if you can roster him now, this is something that I'm wanting to do. Rostered in 49% of ESPN leagues and rostered in 48% of Sleeper Leagues, meaning he is available in over 50% of both ESPN and Sleeper Leagues. This is something that I'm wanting to do. Pick him up and stash him as soon as possible, and I would personally be spending about 5 to 10 fab on him, because once again of the high-powered offense that he is in coming into this year. So Brandon Cooks would be my 8th waiver wire priority. Okay, to close us out here, I have 2 other players, one at the quarterback position and maybe a streamer that could be coming in the number 10. So stay tuned. At number 9, Josh Dobbs. I know Zach brought him last week. I'm bringing him again. And if you're in a 1 quarterback league and you do need a quarterback and Josh Dobbs is available, this is somebody that I'm going to be targeting. I mean, the man is balling out. No matter the team that he is on, the guy is producing. Josh Dobbs is currently QB 10 on the year, and he has been on 2 different teams. One that he won a game last week against Atlanta Falcons, put over 27 fantasy points, and one against New Orleans Saints, another week into this offense, over 27 fantasy points. He is rostered in 38% of ESPN leagues and rostered in 58% of sleeper leagues. He is available if you do need a quarterback in a 1 QB position or 1 QB league. I mean, you look at these teams, it's not sexy, right? I mean, you have Gardner Minshew that's out, Mac Jones that is out, you know, Derek Carr and or Desmond Ridder in those 4 teams that have bye weeks. You can plug and play him. If not, you can even plug and play him based on the scenarios here. The Denver Broncos do give up a decent amount of points to the quarterback position, so definitely keep that in mind as he is going into week 11 if you do need a quarterback play. So Josh Dobbs would be my 9th waiver wire priority. Okay, my last waiver wire priority coming into this week is a defense. If you are looking into the playoffs and or for the next even couple weeks, to be completely honest, the Miami Dolphins has one of the best schedules leading up to the fantasy playoffs. And even in the fantasy playoffs, I did bring that in a video this past week of defensive streamers for the playoffs. I did bring that a little bit earlier this year. Listen to these next 5 matchups. The Las Vegas Raiders, the New York Jets, the Washington Commanders, the Tennessee Titans, and the New York Jets. You saw what all these teams have done to their opposing offenses. You saw what the Raiders did to the Jets. The Raiders are also struggling on the offensive side of the ball. It wasn't a pretty game on that Sunday night. With Washington Commanders, who currently, Sam Howell is the most sacked quarterback currently in the NFL. So definitely keep that in mind. You also have the Tennessee Titans, who Will Levis is up and down, but if he has one of those down games like we saw against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that can be something that we could really like for the Miami Dolphins. He plays New York Jets again in Week 15. So look, those are some really good matchups there. If you do need a defense and are trying to get some good back-to-back games, especially in the playoffs, this is a good defense that you can pick up. They do have some tough matchups in Week 16 and 17, but kicking off the playoffs in Week 15, that is somebody that you can pick up and plug and play specifically for the fantasy playoffs, guys. So hopefully that helps. Once again, Miami Dolphins, Josh Dobbs, Brandon Cooks, Quentin Johnson, Ty Chandler, Zach Charbonnet, Noah Brown, Michael Wilson, Trey McBride, and Keaton Mitchell are my top 10 waiver wire priorities coming into Week 11. Hopefully that helps. Make sure you comment down below with any comments that you have or concerns. We'll always are going to be live 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time almost every single day, answering all of your Start Sit questions, now going into the playoffs as well. So keep that in mind, guys. And as always, it's all love.
Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy, even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.